I can't be your mate. Alara's voice came out cold enough to frost steel, her storm-gray eyes locking onto Draven's molten amber across the treaty table without the slightest tremor. The mate bond that had slammed into both of them half a minute earlier pulsed between them like a struck power line, raw electric, impossible to shut out. Draven's smile unfurled, slow and dangerous, the expression of a predator who'd just found prey bold enough to bare its teeth. You already are. He leaned back with that infuriating, effortless arrogance. Biology doesn't give a damn about politics, Alpha Ilara. The bond exists whether you like it or not. Then I choose not to like it. Ilara forced herself to stay in her chair, when every instinct screamed at her to lunge or flee. Neither option was acceptable. She was the alpha of the Shadow Fen pack. Alphas didn't run, not even from the mate bond tethering her to the one wolf she swore she'd never kneel to. The council chamber suddenly felt too cramped, despite being built to hold 50 wolves. Orin, the neutral mediator who had dragged both sides here today, cleared his throat. Perhaps a short recess would, Nombalara's command, cut the air cleanly. We're here to settle the border conflict and trade access. Personal complications don't erase Blood Moon's economic chokehold on Shadow Fen. Economic chokehold. Draven echoed, amused enough to make Ilara want to smash her fist into his perfect jaw. Dramatic. I'd call it strategic resource management. You'd call theft an extortion strategy. Her fingers tapped the table, once her only outward slip. Your kingdom controls every northern trade route. Shadow Fen has been economically isolated for 3 years. Our people are starving while yours get comfortable on monopolized trade. Then Shadow Fen should have thought about stability before your grandfather murdered my great-uncle and seized Blood Moon territory. Draven's tone stayed calm, but his eyes flashed gold, his wolf pushing the surface. Actions have consequences, Alpha. Your pack's been paying that debt for generations. There it was, the wound that had rotted between their lineages for 60 years. Her grandfather had ambushed Draven's great-uncle and claimed the fertile hunting lands dividing their borders. Blood Moon retaliated by cutting Shadow Fen out of every alliance, trade pact, and opportunity to grow. By the time Ilara fought and won her Alpha challenge 4 years ago, her pack was inches from collapse. Every day since had been a war to rebuild what weak leaders before her had shattered. And now fate had decided that her destined mate, her other half, was the Alpha King whose hand was wrapped around her pack's throat. The irony would have been hilarious if it wasn't catastrophic. My grandfather's sins aren't mine, Ilara said tightly. And they aren't yours either. Yet you're the one choosing to continue the punishment. You benefit from stolen land. Draven's smile sharpened. Don't pretend moral high ground. Your pack still occupies the territory your grandfather took. You want access to trade routes? Return what belongs to Blood Moon. That land has been Shadow Fen territory for 60 years. 3 generations have been born there. You expect me to uproot hundreds of wolves for something that happened before I existed. I expect acknowledgement that your pack stands on stolen ground and spilled blood. Draven rose, his sheer height a calculated intimidation tactic. Ilara stayed seated, refusing to yield an inch, even as the bond yanked hard enough to make her wolf whine. You want concessions from Blood Moon, he said. Start by naming Shadow Fen for what it is. What it is, Ilara replied, voice deadly, calm as a pack paying for one. Alpha's mistakes for 6 decades. My father tried to mend things, reparations, apologies, negotiations. Your father rejected all of it and tightened the noose. So don't lecture me about acknowledgement when Blood Moon slammed every door we tried to open. Because your offers were shallow concessions. Draven leaned in, palms flat on the table. A polite apology doesn't return stolen land or resurrect a murdered Alpha. Your father wanted forgiveness without real sacrifice, and yours wanted total submission. Ilara met his gaze despite the bond screaming at the proximity. He demanded Shadow Fen dissolve, merge into Blood Moon, accept permanent inferiority. That isn't reconciliation. It's conquest. Maybe Shadow Fen needed conquering, Draven. Murmured soft but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. Your pack's leadership has been weak for generations. A murderer. A coward. And you... His eyes traveled over her with scorching scrutiny. You're clawing desperately to save something that might not deserve saving. Rage surged through her, slicing straight through the bond's pull. She rose in one fluid motion, her alpha presence filling the chamber like a storm front. My pack deserves better than the judgment of wolves, who've never had to fight for breath. Shadow Fen survived despite Blood Moon's best efforts to crush us. We adapted. We rebuilt. We forged strength in places your comfortable kingdom can't fathom. So don't you ever suggest we don't deserve to exist. Power crackled between them, two alphas, locked in a collision course of fury dominance and something far more dangerous simmering underneath. Around them, council members froze, some anxious, some captivated. Orin tried again. Perhaps we should know. Both said it together and glared at each other for the synchronicity. This needs handling, Draven continued. Shadow Fen can't keep pretending history didn't happen. And you can't keep... Don't tell me what I can or can't do. Elara moved around the table, each step dragging pleasure and pain through the bond like twin blades. I've led my pack for 4 years. 4 years of impossible choices and sacrifices. I don't need a kingdom-raised alpha telling me how to do my job. Kingdom-raised. Draven barked a humorless laugh. You think inheriting the largest territory in the north was easy? I was 24 when my father died. 24 and suddenly responsible for thousands of wolves, political alliances, and trade networks I barely understood. I've spent 8 years holding this kingdom together while rivals waited for me to fail. He met her eyes, anger fading into something rawer, truer. So don't pretend you're the only one who had to bleed for your position. The honesty hit her harder than any insult. Elara had always assumed his path had been smooth. Privilege, power, legacy. But the exhaustion in his eyes told another story entirely. Draven had fought his own battles, just not the same kind. Then you should understand, Elara said, her voice steady and low, why I can't just hand over everything I've built. Even if the mate bond is real. Even if nature says we're meant to be. I won't sacrifice Shadow Fen for it. My pack comes first. Always. Something in Draven's face shifted. The challenge faded into something quieter, respect maybe. I wouldn't expect anything less, he said. The day you put me before your pack is the day I'd know you weren't worthy of being my mate. The words struck Elara like a slap, because they weren't cruel. They were the truth. A mate who demanded she abandon her duty wasn't a partner. He was a liability. This council session is clearly unproductive, said one of the Blood Moon advisors, an older man with silver hair and a stare like ice. Perhaps we should reconvene once both sides have had time to reflect. Councillor Malus raises a fair point. Another voice added, a female wolf with sharp eyes. The emotional tension in the room suggests complications. Clear negotiation requires clarity of mind. Elara caught the way the word complications was emphasized. They'd noticed. Of course they had. The mate bond might as well have been written across her skin. The way her and Draven's eyes locked. The heat. The tension. That possessive undertone masked as hostility. There are no complications, Elara replied coldly. Just the same conflict we've been dealing with for 6 decades. Blood Moon wants submission. Shadow Fen refuses. Nothing has changed. Everything has, Draven said quietly, but his voice carried, and we both know it. The bond throbbed inside her, pulling her toward him, whispering to bridge the distance, close the gap, finish what instinct had started. Her wolf paced beneath her skin, agitated, restless, craving his nearness. This was why she couldn't give in to the bond. The second she did, her control would slip. Her pack would see it as weakness. Her enemies would strike. And Draven, he'd gain leverage she couldn't afford to give. This meeting is over. Alara stood, matching his earlier move. She was taller than most female wolves, but Draven still towered over her. Their eyes met one last time. The mate bond flared between them like a solar flare. Elder Orin informed the council that Shadow Fen rejects Blood Moon's terms. We'll find other options. There are no other options, Draven said, quiet and unwavering. I control every northern and eastern trade route. The Western alliances won't touch you because of your pack's history. The South forces you into human territory. You can't operate there. You need me, Alara, whether you admit it or not. I need access to trade, she shot back. Not you. The lie burned on her tongue. Her wolf snarled at the denial. Find someone else to dominate Alpha King. Shadow Fen isn't interested. She turned her beta and 2 warriors falling into place behind her. She made it 3 steps before Draven's voice halted her cold. Running away. That's not very alpha of you. Alara froze. Slowly she turned. Excuse me. You heard me? Draven's amber eyes gleamed with wicked challenge. The great Alpha Alara, who beat 7 challengers in single combat, who pulled a broken pack out of the ashes with nothing but grit and strategy, scared of a mate bond. I'm not afraid of the bond, she snapped, sharper than she meant to. I'm being realistic. Some of us have responsibilities more important than biology. Responsibilities, Draven echoed, stalking around the table with predatory ease, like keeping your wolves from finding out their unmated alpha met her mate and rejected him. He tilted his head, studying her. How do you plan to spin that? Sorry, everyone. I know rejecting a mate goes against everything we believe, but I figured politics mattered more than destiny. Don't. Alara's voice dropped into full alpha command, laced with pure authority. Don't you dare use our culture against me. Then don't pretend this is logic when it's clearly pride. Draven stopped 2 feet away, close enough that Alara felt the heat of him. Close enough her wolf let out a soft, helpless sound. You won't acknowledge the bond because it means you'd be bound to me. The enemy. The heir to the land your grandfather stole. And that ruins your narrative, doesn't it? Shadow Fen, the eternal victim. My narrative. Alara let out a bitter laugh. You've spent 3 years tightening a noose around my pack, and you want to talk to me about narratives? My people are starving. Our children are growing up in scarcity. Families are leaving because they have no future. And you sitting in your throne room, pretending this is justice for a grudge older than either of us. Then make it right. Draven's voice dipped lower. Not angry, intimate. Dangerous. Return the land. Admit the theft. Give me something I can bring back to my council to lift the sanctions. I can't. The words cut her. Even if I wanted to, I can't displace hundreds of wolves from land they were born on. My pack would revolt. I'd lose everything. Then we're stuck. Draven lifted his hand just inches from her face. The bond pulsed like a wound. Unless you're willing to consider something else. Alara's breath caught. What else? The mate bond. His smile was sharp. It's not just biology or romance. It's alliance. Power. 2 alphas bonded. We could reshape everything. Your pack. My pack. Side by side. You want to absorb Shadow Fen into Blood Moon, Alara said flatly. Make me your Luna. Put my wolves under your rule. Did I say that? Draven dropped his hand. You're projecting alpha. I said alliance. Not subjugation. 2 alphas. Shared power. Shared resources. Unorthodox, sure. But so is a mate bond between enemies. Shared power. She studied him, searching for the lie. You expect me to believe you'd actually share control? Let me make decisions for Blood Moon. I expect you to at least consider it, he said, Instead of assuming, I want to dominate you. His eyes sparked gold again, though the idea does have its appeal. Heat flushed her face. She hated the way her body reacted to the look. Two dominant alphas. The bond between them wasn't just instinct. It was fire, power, territory, desire, control. And they both knew it. This conversation is over, Alara rasped. Elder Orin will reconvene this council in 1 week. That gives both sides time to evaluate alternatives. There are no alternatives, Draven said again, but his voice this time was softer, rougher, heated. And we both know how this ends, Alara. The bond won't be denied forever. Biology wins. Alara turned before she lost control, before she did something she'd regret, like touch him, or kill him, or worse, kiss him, just to see if he tasted as dangerous as he looked. She barely made it outside before her legs started to buckle. Alara reached the transport and climbed inside without a word, her fingers digging into the seat as the door shut behind her. Ronan her beta waited a beat before speaking. His voice was cautious. Alpha. She didn't answer. What happened in there? You smell like... He cut himself off. His eyes widened. No, tell me that's not what I think it is. Don't, she said, her tone sharp. Alara slumped into her seat, grateful for the privacy barrier between the front and the back. Just drive. Ronan rarely used her name. Alara, he said slowly, is the Alpha King of Blood Moon. Your mate. The silence that followed was answer enough. Shit. Ronan exhaled. This is catastrophic. Of all the times for a bond, this is the worst. She leaned her head back, eyes closed, exhaustion and dread curling like smoke in her chest. Yeah, I'm aware. What now, I don't know. The admission tasted like defeat. If Shadow Fen finds out, half of them will assume I've been compromised. The other half will demand I reject the bond publicly. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. Either way, I lose authority. And if you don't tell them? Ronan asked. Then I'm lying. About something fundamental. Which might be worse. There's no way out, is there? Not a good one. Ronan glanced at her through the mirror. Maybe not good, but maybe not hopeless either. She frowned. Explain. What if you used it, he said. The bond, the connection to Draven. What if it's leverage? Alara looked away, jaw tight. You said he offered an alliance, Ronan continued. 2 alphas working together. What if that wasn't just talk? He won't share power. It was a strategy bait. Maybe. But his scent didn't lie. I was close enough to tell. No deception, no manipulation, just heat, tension, maybe something real. Alara didn't want to admit it, but even her wolf hadn't sensed a lie from Draven. Only challenge and something deeper. What if he meant it, Ronan pressed? What if he actually wants to build something new? Not conquer, but combine. That's not just an alliance. That's a power structure no one's seen before. That's not submission. That's empire. She met his gaze in the mirror. You're always telling the pack we adapt or die, he added. Maybe this is evolution, Alara. Maybe fighting the bond isn't the smart move. Maybe using it is. She wanted to shut the idea down, but she couldn't, because Ronan had a point. She hadn't rebuilt Shadow Fen by doing what was easy. She'd made hard calls, risked everything, and maybe this bond didn't have to break her. Maybe it could save them. I need time to think, she murmured, and I need intel. On what? On Draven, his inner circle, his history, his weaknesses. You want leverage. I want insurance, Alara snapped. If he wants an alliance, he's going to earn it, and I'll make damn sure the terms protect my pack. Ronan let out a low whistle. Now that sounds like my alpha. Then his grin turned wicked. Want me to start with his bedroom habits? I hear he's had quite a few. Don't finish that sentence if you value your tongue. The snarl that followed came from somewhere deep and primal, a possessive growl that surprised even her. The bond flared red and sharp at the thought of Draven with anyone else. She crushed it down hard. She wasn't some love-struck girl pining for her mate. She was Alpha of Shadow Fen, and she had a pack to protect. Even if it meant dealing with an impossible, infuriating, and dangerously attractive Alpha King who smiled like he knew exactly how much he affected her. This was going to be a very long week. Draven waited until Ilara's vehicle disappeared from view before he allowed himself to react. His hands tightened on the conference table hard enough to make the wood creak. The mate bond roared inside him, urging him to follow her, to claim her, to finish what biology had started the second their eyes locked. Elder Orin cleared his throat, breaking the tension. That was unexpected. An understatement. Draven straightened, forcing his body to relax, his alpha control taking over, suppressing the primal instincts that threatened to rip through him. How long before the whole territory knows the council members are bound by confidentiality? Orin replied. Doesn't matter. Malus. Sharp-eyed advisor added with a cynical smirk. Things like this. They have a way of spreading. A mate bond between rival alphas that hasn't happened in living memory. It's insane. Draven's Beta Kalis moved to his side, his expression neutral, but his posture tense. Alpha, we need to discuss the implications later, Kalis said softly, eyeing the door. Draven nodded, heading for the exit. I'll need an hour. Draven made it to the neutral territory's southern gardens before his control shattered. The pull of the mate bond was too much to ignore. In an instant, he shifted his human form, melting into the massive golden wolf that was his true self. Larger than any ordinary wolf, marked with dark gold along his spine that signified his alpha status, he ran. The mate bond yanked him north toward Shadow Fen, toward Ilara. Every instinct screamed at him to follow, to hunt, to claim her as his. But he resisted. He forced himself to run south, away from the temptation, pushing his muscles until they screamed with the burn of exhaustion. Only when his wolf calmed did he shift back into human form. The bond was still there, thrumming beneath his skin like a second heartbeat, tethering him to a female alpha who had rejected him with ice in her voice and fire in her eyes. Moon help him, but that fire had been beautiful. Draven had known about Ilara before today. He knew her reputation, how she'd rebuilt Shadow Fen from the brink of collapse. Brilliant. Fierce. Devoted to her pack. What he hadn't known was that she was his mate. One look across a treaty table had rewritten everything. He'd spent 3 years carefully isolating Shadow Fen, economically, revenge for old crimes, and a strategic necessity. He'd thought she would fold like every other alpha before her, agreeing to whatever terms he dictated, absorbing Shadow Fen into Blood Moon. Then Ilara had walked into that council chamber. Ash-blonde hair, braided sharply. Her gray-blue eyes locking onto his with the intensity of a storm, and the mate bond had hit him like a freight train. Biology doesn't care about politics, Draven had told her. But the truth was, he'd lied. Politics cared very much about biology. The mate bond was sacred. Rejecting it was a taboo. If word spread that Ilara had denied their connection, her pack would lose faith in her leadership. That meant Draven had leverage he hadn't expected. Leverage he could use to finally wipe Shadow Fen off the map once and for all. And yet, that thought made him feel like shit. Because you're attracted to her, Draven muttered under his breath. Attraction makes you stupid. But it wasn't just attraction. The bond wasn't just about physical desire, it was deeper, soul deep. Recognition that this woman was meant to be his equal, his partner, his other half. Ilara was that equal. She'd stood her ground against him, outmatched politically and economically, meeting his every challenge with one of her own. She didn't reject the bond out of fear, she rejected it out of loyalty to her pack. That kind of strength, unyielding, rare, was dangerous in an opponent and priceless in a partner. And that raised a question Draven hadn't let himself seriously consider until now. What if he'd meant what he said? What if he actually could share power with Alara? Not absorb her, not dominate her, but led beside her. The thought was radical. Completely outside the pack structure he'd grown up in, it would mean reimagining everything he knew about hierarchy, control, and tradition. But it would also give him something he'd never had, a true equal. Someone who wouldn't follow blindly but challenge him when he needed it, stand shoulder to shoulder with him. When it counted, push back with fire in her eyes when he got it wrong. Someone like Alara. "You're spiraling." Kayla's voice broke through from behind. Of course he'd followed. Beta instincts. "It's just a mate bond," he added casual. Draven didn't even turn around. "People bond with wolves from allied packs," he said coldly. "Not with alphas they've spent years trying to break. Fair." Kalis dropped beside him in the grass, thoughtful. "So, what are you thinking, that the universe has a pretty twisted sense of humor?" Draven's gaze fixed on the north, where Shadow Fen stretched beyond the tree line. "And that I may have just handed Alara the perfect reason to never believe a word I say? Because of the 3 years you've been strangling her pack financially?" "Exactly." Draven dragged a hand through his hair, jaw clenched. "She'll assume any offer I make is manipulation. Leveraging the bond instead of brute force. She's smart," Kalis said. "She's right to question it." Draven nodded slowly. "I would if I were her." "So prove you're not playing a game," Kalis said. "Make concessions. Show her you're serious. If I do that, my council will tear me apart. They want escalation, not negotiation. They see her as a threat, not an ally." "Then you convince them," Kalis said simply. "You're the Alpha King. That crown's supposed to mean something. Lead." The words hit harder than expected. "The real question is," Kalis added, eyes steady, "is she worth it?" Was she? He'd known her all of 30 minutes. 30 minutes filled with tension, challenge, and a mate bond he hadn't seen coming. It wasn't enough time to rebuild an empire around. But then he remembered her eyes, gray-blue like a winter storm. The way she held herself like steel, even when her world was falling apart. The fierce mind behind every word. The way she spoke about her wolves like she'd bleed for them without hesitation. Yes, she was worth it. The realization landed like a stone in his chest. Unshakable, solid. Alara was worth every risk, every shift in strategy. Now he just had to convince her. "Set up another meeting," Draven said, rising to his feet. "Private. Just her and me. No council, no advisors." Kalis stared. "That's either brilliant or suicidal. 2 rival alphas. 1 unclaimed mate bond." "No witnesses," Kalis said slowly. "That's basically a declaration of war or something messier. I'll handle it." Draven's voice was firm. "Reach out to her, Beta. Ronan, ask for a neutral ground meeting in 3 days." He paused. "And Kalis, make sure it's clear this is about the bond. Not politics, not territory. You're playing with fire. I know." A razor-sharp grin touched Draven's face. "But so is Alara. Let's see who burns first." The week that followed was the longest Alara had ever endured. Shadow Fen's pack house was buried deep in the marshlands, shielded by dark waters and twisting paths only the native-born could navigate. It made the territory defensible, nearly impossible for outsiders to breach. But it also made it isolating. Beautiful, yes, but limiting. Everything about Alara's pack felt like a reflection of their struggle, barely surviving but still holding on. She stood in her office, staring at the maps sprawled across her desk. Maps of trade routes she couldn't access, alliances she couldn't form, opportunities that remained just out of reach, always locked behind Blood Moon's suffocating grip on the economy. The mate bond throbbed beneath her skin, a constant reminder of Draven, the Alpha King who could solve all her problems with a single decree if she was willing to pay his price. "You're thinking too loud again." Ronan entered without knocking, as was his right as her beta. The pack's starting to notice what? That their alpha's been distracted for 4 days, that you smell different, that you snap at council members and then apologize, something you never do. Ronan dropped into the chair across from her desk, his gaze thoughtful. "Alara, they'll figure it out eventually. Mate bonds aren't exactly subtle. Then they'll figure it out when I'm ready to tell them," she replied sharply. She turned away from the maps, exhaustion sinking into her bones. "How bad is it?" The speculation. Ronan's expression was neutral, but there was a flicker of concern. "Running the full gamut. Some think you're sick. Others think you have a secret lover. Some are even speculating that you're planning to challenge Draven to a death match. At least the last one sounds interesting." Ronan's lips quirked slightly, but his tone remained serious. "It'd be a lot less interesting if you had to follow through." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to something more urgent. "Alara, I need to know what you're planning. The bond is real. Draven knows it. The council members from that meeting know it. How long are you going to pretend it doesn't exist?" "As long as I have to." But even Alara heard the uncertainty in her own voice. The mate bond wasn't weakening. If anything, it was pulling at her ardor, making her wolf restless, filling her dreams with golden eyes and a dangerous smile. She hadn't slept properly in days. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Draven through the bond. His presence like a second heartbeat, emotions bleeding through in ways that shouldn't have been possible without a claim. Frustration, curiosity, desire that made her skin flush even when she was alone, and beneath it all, something that felt like loneliness. "You know the pack will support you," Ronan said quietly. "If you choose to explore the bond, most of them want you to have a mate, want you to be happy." "I'm not here to be happy." Alara snapped her hands, tightening on the desk. "I'm here to lead. Shadow Fen needs an alpha focused on survival, not distracted by biology," Ronan added. Alara didn't reply. She was already tired of the internal struggle. Ronan stood and walked over to the map she had been studying. "Look at this, Alara. Really look at it." She glanced at the map, seeing the full scope of their isolation. "We're surrounded. Blood Moon controls the north and east. The western packs won't trade with us because of the old blood debt. To the south is human territory, where we can't operate freely. We're choking and you know it." Alara knew the truth of it, and admitting it tasted like failure. But accepting Draven as her mate wouldn't solve it. He could use the bond to manipulate her, to force her into concessions she couldn't afford to make. The moment she was claimed, she'd become vulnerable. Or the moment Draven claimed her, he would become unstoppable. Ronan tapped the map where Blood Moon's territory stretched across the northern regions. "Think about it strategically. Damon offered an alliance, 2 alphas, equal power, shared resources." "If he means it," she whispered, staring at the map. "If we could negotiate real power sharing, Shadow Fen would have access to everything we need." "And if he's lying?" Ronan's tone grew sharper. "If it's just a ploy to absorb your pack, then we fight." Ronan's eyes blazed with conviction. "You're one of the strongest alphas I've ever seen, Alara. You won your position by taking on 7 challengers in a single day. You've rebuilt this pack from nothing." Alara swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. She'd earned this pack through blood and sweat, and now she had to figure out what the mate bond meant for her future. Through sheer will. "Do you really think Draven could dominate you, even if he tried?" Alara wanted to say yes, wanted to believe she was strong enough to resist an Alpha King with generations of power behind him. But the mate bond complicated things. It made her crave his presence, his approval, his touch in ways that defied reason, stripped her of the logic she usually relied on. "I think," Alara said slowly, her voice barely a whisper, that the bond makes me weak in ways I've never been before. And that terrifies me. Ronan was quiet for a long time. Can I tell you something that might piss you off? When has that ever stopped you? Ronan's smile was brief. Fair point. He leaned back, his eyes assessing her. I've been watching you for 4 days. And you know what I see? Alara didn't respond. An alpha who's so afraid of looking weak that she's missing the chance to make something real happen. Draven didn't have to call for a private meeting. He didn't have to offer terms for an alliance. He could have used the bond to make a public fool of you, undermine your authority. But he didn't. He's either smart enough to know that would backfire, or he really wants to partner with you. Ronan held up a hand before Alara could snap back. I'm not saying you should trust him blindly, he said. I'm saying, what if he's being genuine? What if the universe gave you a mate who's actually your equal in the ways that matter? Alara shook her head slightly. The universe gave me a mate whose pack has been trying to destroy mine for 3 generations, she muttered. The universe gave you a mate who controls the resources you need to save your pack. Ronan's voice was calm, firm, but gentle. The real question is, Alara, whether you're brave enough to use that instead of fighting it. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she wasn't afraid, that she was simply being practical. But Ronan knew her too well. He could see beneath her ice-cold alpha exterior, knew how terrified she was of making a wrong move, one that could destroy everything she'd built. I got a message this morning, Ronan added, from Blood Moon. Draven's requesting a private meeting. In 3 days. Just you and him. No counsel. No witnesses. Alara's pulse jumped. That's insane. That's opportunity. Ronan moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. You know what I think. He didn't wait for her response. I think Draven's scared too. Scared of wanting something he can't control. Of being vulnerable to a mate who could destroy him. The difference is, he's willing to risk it anyway. Risking it might destroy both of us. Or it might save you both. Ronan opened the door. The meeting's in 3 days. Sunset. Neutral territory. The abandoned barn near the eastern border. I already accepted on your behalf. You what? Somebody had to make the decision. You've been paralyzed for 4 days. Ronan's tone was unapologetic. You're my alpha, and I'd follow you into hell, but sometimes even alphas need a push. This is me pushing. He left before Alara could respond, leaving her standing alone, staring at the maps that suddenly didn't feel so insurmountable. 3 days. 3 days to decide if Ronan was right, if Draven was being genuine, if she was brave enough to risk everything on a bond she hadn't asked for. 3 days to decide if she would save Shadow Fen or doom it entirely. Meanwhile, 300 miles north, Draven was facing the same dilemma. You look like hell, Kalis observed, watching Draven pace the private study like a caged beast. When's the last time you slept? 2 days ago. Maybe 3. Draven couldn't remember. The mate bond made sleep impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt Alara, her presence, her emotions pulled toward her like a magnetic force. The constant tug that demanded he go to her. How's the council taking the news? About as well as expected. Kalis replied dryly. Half of them think you should reject the bond outright. A quarter think you're just using it as leverage. And the rest? They think you've lost your mind. Should use it to finally absorb Shadow Fen. Kalis leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The rest are just waiting to see which way the wind blows before picking a side. Sounds about right. Draven stopped pacing long enough to pour himself a drink he didn't actually want. The liquor sat untouched in the glass. And Counselor Malus is pushing hard for rejection, Kalis added. Says mating with a rival alpha compromises your power. That accepting the bond makes you look weak. He's not completely wrong, Kalis admitted after a beat. The old guard struggling with the idea of their king being tied to someone who stood against Blood Moon for years. Draven's jaw clenched, his hand tightening on the glass. The traditionalists will survive. What does the rest of the pack think? That depends on what you plan to do. Kalis fixed him with a pointed look. Are you actually considering Alara as an equal partner? Or is this still about controlling Shadow Fen through the bond? I don't know, Draven said, and the honesty cost him. When I first felt the bond, I saw an advantage, a way to solve the Shadow Fen problem without bloodshed. But now... He didn't finish. The storm of emotions swirling inside him, attraction, respect, something deeper had grown louder by the day. But now you're not just seeing her as strategy, Kayla said, finishing the thought. You're drawn to her as a person. She's remarkable. The words left his mouth before he could censor them. Did you see her in that council chamber, outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and still refused to back down? That kind of resolve, it's rare. You don't find that often. It's also dangerous, Kalis replied. If she's not on your side, that's exactly why I want her with me, not against me. Draven set the untouched glass down and leaned against the table, his voice growing firmer. I've been thinking about what she said about needing real guarantees. Actual power sharing. What if we did it? Built something new. A dual alpha system. Shared authority. Her and me leading together. Kalis arched a brow. That's never been done before. Neither has a mate bond between rival alphas. Draven moved to the window, staring north toward where Shadow Fen lay hidden beyond the pines. I'm tired, Kalis. Tired of carrying a war that began with my great uncle. Tired of punishing wolves who weren't even born when this feud started. And Alara's right. This fight, it's dragged on too long. Maybe it's time we change the script. The council will never agree to equal power sharing, Kalis warned. Then I'll convince them. Draven's voice was resolute. I'm the Alpha King. If I lead, they'll follow. But even he could hear the flicker of doubt. Generations had been spent building Blood Moon's dominance. Undoing that narrative wouldn't be simple. What if she says no, Kalis asked softly. What if she rejects the bond? The thought stabbed through Draven's chest like a blade, the mate bond reacting violently at the idea of severance. Then I'll respect her decision, he said, even as the words burned. But I'll make damn sure she knows what she's walking away from. That this isn't manipulation, it's real. Partnership. Choice. You're falling for her. Kalis said, not as a question but as a truth, already decided. I barely know her. That's not a denial. Draven turned from the window and met Kalis's gaze. I'm drawn to her. I respect her. I want to know if this could actually work, not just as a political arrangement, but something more. He exhaled, searching for the words. The way she held her ground. The way she fights for her people. The fire in her eyes. That's love, Kalis said simply. Or the beginning of it. Biology may have sparked the bond, but what you're feeling now, that's choice, and you're choosing to care about her. Draven's jaw set. Then I'm choosing to give us a real shot. He turned, clarity crystallizing in every movement. Send the message to her, Beta. Neutral ground. 3 days. Just the two of us. Kalis gave a nod. And if she doesn't believe you, then I'll keep showing her until she does. Draven's smile turned sharp. She's not the only stubborn alpha in this story. 3 days felt like both an eternity and an instant. Every second stretched and snapped like the pull of a taut rope. Coming here alone had been risky. Draven could have warriors waiting in the shadows, could try to force a claim, could twist the mate bond to his advantage in countless ways. But Ronan's intelligence work had uncovered something interesting. Draven had been alone since taking the throne 8 years ago. No mate, no serious relationships. He'd buried himself in his duties, too focused on maintaining his kingdom to indulge in romance. If he was requesting a private meeting about the bond, it meant he was either genuinely curious or he was scheming something far more complex. Either way, Alara needed to know what was happening. She felt him before she saw him. The mate bond pulled tighter with each step. She hadn't expected it to affect her this much, but every inch closer he got was like a magnet drawing her in, even when her wolf screamed at her to keep her distance. The barn door creaked as Draven stepped in. His golden wolf form melted away, and he stood there, wearing nothing more than a plain t-shirt and jeans. But the muscle beneath them was impossible to ignore. His golden blonde hair caught the afternoon sun that slipped through the gaps in the roof, and the air seemed to shimmer around him. "You came." Draven's voice was quiet, but his eyes were sharp as he stopped 20 feet away. He gave her space, respecting the pull of the bond, even if his presence tugged at her relentlessly. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't." Alara answered, her voice steady, even though her heart raced. She forced herself to stay still, even though her wolf screamed at her to close the gap. "This is either incredibly stupid or incredibly necessary. I haven't decided which. It could be both." Draven's smile softened, less of a challenge, more of a genuine acknowledgement. "Thank you for taking the risk." "Don't thank me yet," Alara replied, her tone flat. "I'm here because my beta convinced me it's strategic." The lie came easily, but she knew he could probably smell the deception through their bond. She watched his reaction carefully. "You said this was about us as mates, not as alphas. So let's talk directly." "I appreciate that," Draven said, stepping closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "The mate bond is real, Alara. We both feel it. Denying it won't make it disappear." "I'm aware," she responded, her hands clenching at her sides. "What's your point?" "My point is." Draven's voice dropped, his gaze steady. "We're in a unique situation. Two alphas, both leading struggling packs in our own ways, connected by a bond we can't ignore." He stopped just 10 feet away, now close enough for her to feel the heat radiating off him. His amber eyes flickered with something unreadable, the dark gold of his wolf flashing beneath the surface. "We can fight it. We can reject the bond publicly, deal with the fallout, keep trying to crush each other, economically and politically. Or we can explore another way. Alara." His voice softened as he said her name. "The alliance you mentioned." Alara's voice stayed level, but her heart thundered in her chest. "You still expect me to believe that's genuine? I expect you to be suspicious." Draven said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I would be. But yes, I'm serious. Not because I'm suddenly overcome with romantic feelings, but because I'm practical." "You're right," he continued, his voice firm. "That blood moon has been strangling Shadow Fen economically. But that strategy only works if you eventually fold. Which, to my surprise, you haven't." Alara didn't reply. Surprised, Draven asked, his voice softer now, as if admitting something to himself. "I'm impressed," he added. "You've kept Shadow Fen together through tactics I didn't see coming, found trade partners I didn't know existed. Your pack should have collapsed 2 years ago, but you've kept it alive through sheer will and brilliant strategy." Draven's gaze turned from calculating to something more personal, and Alara felt a flicker of admiration for him. "That's not someone I want as an enemy." He met her eyes. "That's someone I want as a partner." Alara's breath caught in her throat. The sincerity in his words was matched by the warmth in his scent. No lies, no manipulation, just honesty, and something else she hadn't expected: respect. Pretty words, she managed to say, her voice steady, despite the storm inside her. "But words don't change reality. You're the Alpha King of the largest territory in the north. I'm the alpha of a struggling pack that you've been trying to destroy for years. The power dynamic isn't even close to equal." "Then we make it equal," Draven said simply. He stepped closer within arm's reach, now his presence overwhelming. "Now I have resources. I have trade access. You have tactical brilliance, and a pack loyal enough to survive impossible odds." His gaze softened as he spoke, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "Combined, we'd be unstoppable. But only if we actually share power. Only if we're true partners." "How?" Alara demanded, her voice cracking under the weight of the question. "How does a power sharing work?" How does an alliance between two alphas actually work? Alara asked, voice firm. Who makes the final calls? Whose pact takes priority? What happens when we disagree? We figure it out, Draven replied softly together. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers grazed her jaw, just a whisper of contact, and the mate bond flared like fire under her skin, heat flashing down her spine and blooming in her chest. I don't have all the answers, Alara, he admitted, his voice low and honest. But I know this much. Staying enemies while bound by this thing will destroy us. Both of us. He paused, searching her face. So either we reject the bond completely, which I've heard is pure agony and rarely works, or we figure out how to make this something more. Alara knew she should step back, shut this down before it spiraled further. But Draven's touch felt right in a way nothing ever had. Her wolf purred with satisfaction just being near him. If I agree to explore this, she said slowly, cautiously, I need real guarantees, not vague promises you can walk away from when it suits you. Name them. Shadow Fen stays autonomous, she said. We don't become some satellite of Blood Moon. My wolves answer to me. First, always. Agreed. I want access to your trade routes, she added. Immediately. Not after some ceremonial claiming or drawn-out courtship. Also agreed on one condition. Draven's tone shifted just enough to catch her attention. You open negotiations about the disputed land. I'm not asking for you to give it up outright, just acknowledge it's a complicated issue. Alara's jaw tensed. That territory is home to hundreds of wolves. Families. Pups. I know, he said gently, which is why I said negotiations, not demands. His thumb brushed her jawline, soft but deliberate. The touch made her stomach clench. I'm not asking you to uproot your pack. I'm asking you to recognize that Shadow Fen's survival has in part come from land taken by blood. That's all. It was more than she wanted to give, but also less than she'd feared. Acknowledgement wasn't the same as surrender. It was a political move that bruised her pride, but didn't endanger her wolves. Fine, she said, finally. But if this is a trap, if you use this bond to manipulate me, I'll make you regret it in ways you can't even imagine. Noted. Draven's smile curled sharp once more, challenge rekindled in his eyes. Should I be afraid? Terrified? Alara smirked, the edge in her voice razor sharp. I'm not some submissive Luna who's going to bow at your feet, Draven. If we do this, really do this, I'm your equal in every way. That means I'll call you out when you're wrong, she added, and I'll expect your pack to treat me with the same damn respect you get. Good. He stepped closer. His other hand came up, framing her face, holding her gently but firmly. I don't want a submissive mate. I want someone who'll keep me honest, who'll call out my bullshit and knock me down a peg when I get too full of myself. That's going to happen a lot. I'm counting on it. His voice dropped again, going intimate. Fair warning. I want to kiss you now. If you're not ready. Alara didn't let him finish. She grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him down, pressing her mouth to his. The bond ignited like wildfire. Pleasure surged between them, so intense it was almost painful. Draven growled into her mouth, hands tightening around her, deepening the kiss without hesitation. Alara matched him, move for move, her fingers tangling in his hair, refusing to yield. This wasn't the soft, tender affection of a fairy tale mating. This was two alphas clashing, hungry, fierce, dominant. His hands found her waist and yanked her against him. Alara responded by biting his lower lip, hard enough to taste blood. Draven grunted against her mouth. Dangerous, he muttered. I like it. I'm not here to play games, she breathed, pulling back just enough to lock eyes with him. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures, no political theater dressed up as romance. Agreed. Draven's amber eyes burned with heat. Though I do reserve the right to enjoy driving you crazy. Likewise, Alara said, stepping back before she gave in to the pull again, before she let herself imagine what it would feel like to let him claim her right there in that dust-choked barn. We need rules. She exhaled. Rules for, how does this work? Alara asked, voice steady, though her mind raced with the weight of the situation. How do we navigate being mates and rival alphas and all the complications that come with it? Draven looked at her clearly, lost in thought. The mate bond hummed between them, with a sense of satisfaction pulling at him, urging him to step closer. But he resisted. We need to be smart about this, Alara added, forcing herself to think, past the intense connection that clouded her thoughts. Agreed, Draven said, running a hand through his hair, looking almost dazed. Okay, rules. Alara nodded. We tell our packs about the bond, but we make it clear we're still exploring alliance options. We're not rushing into anything. Not yet. And we keep pack business separate from personal, Draven added, until we figure out how to merge them. Alara met his eyes, the bond thrumming between them like a promise. She wanted to trust him. Wanted to believe this wasn't just another political maneuver. I don't want your council using our relationship against Shadow Fen, she said, voice firm. And I don't want my pack thinking you're using the bond to manipulate me, Draven replied. We present this as a political alliance, Alara said, that happens to have romantic potential. Draven smiled slightly. We set boundaries, public versus private, what's negotiable and what's not. And we communicate, Alara said, instead of playing power games when things get complicated. They stared at each other, the mate bond between them thrumming with approval. This could work. It was crazy, unprecedented, and probably doomed to fail in 100 different ways, but it could work. One more thing, Alara said, voice serious. No claiming until we're both certain. The mark is permanent. I'm not doing it until I trust you completely. Draven's expression was serious, the weight of the promise clear. Fair. Same goes for me. He stepped closer, offering his hand. When we claim each other, it'll be as equals. Not because biology demands it. Not because politics forces it. But because we choose it. Partners, Alara said, her heart pounding as she took his hand. Draven smiled. So, do we have a deal? Alpha Alara? Alara stared at his hand, at the scarred knuckles and calloused palm. This was it. The moment that would change everything. She could walk away now. She could try to fight the bond, go back to struggling on her own, or she could take the risk. Trust that Draven meant what he said. Build something new from the ashes of old hatred. She clasped his hand. We have a deal, Alpha King Draven. The mate bond flared bright between them, sealing the agreement in a way words never could. And for the first time in 4 years, Alara felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. This was going to be complicated, messy, and probably disastrous in more ways than one. But it was a chance. And Alara had rebuilt Shadow Fen from the ground up by being willing to take risks when everyone else thought she was insane. What was one more? 2 weeks later, Alara stood in Blood Moon's council chamber, trying to hide the nervous tension in her shoulders as she announced the outcome of the mate bond. It's gone about as well as expected, she said dryly. Which is to say, terribly at first. Shadow Fen's council was torn. Some celebrated their alpha finally having a mate, while others recoiled at the fact that said mate was Draven, the Alpha King who had been choking them economically for years. Blood Moon's council had its own divide open, hostility from the traditionalists and cautious optimism from the younger wolves. But Draven had stood by her side throughout every meeting, every challenge, every moment when it would have been easier for him to back down. He presented their alliance proposal with careful political strategy, making it clear that this wasn't about absorption, but about partnership. 2 alphas, 2 packs, working together instead of against each other. The negotiations were brutal. Councillor Malus had demanded impossible concessions. Shadow Fen's elders had pushed back on terms they saw as unfavorable. But slowly, painfully, they hammered out an agreement both sides could live with. Shadow Fen would retain autonomy but open formal trade relations with Blood Moon. The disputed territory would remain Shadow Fen's, with Blood Moon receiving economic compensation over 10 years. Both packs would contribute warriors to a joint security force to patrol shared borders. And most radically, Draven and Alara would establish a precedent for dual alpha leadership, two equal rulers making decisions together. It wasn't perfect. There were compromises Alara hated, and terms Draven clearly hadn't wanted. But it was functional, sustainable, a foundation they could build on. Now came the hardest part, actually making it work. "You're nervous." Draven's voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. They stood side by side at the head of the council table, presenting a united front, as both councils met together for the first time in 60 years. "I'm terrified," Alara admitted, her voice low, a slight tremor in her words. "This could still fall apart so easily." "Then we won't let it." Draven set his hand, finding hers under the table. Hidden from view, but grounding. His grip was steady, a silent promise. "We've come this far. We can handle whatever comes next." Alara wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that two rival packs that had fought each other for generations, could actually learn to work together. That enemies could become allies. But she also knew how easily trust could shatter. Alpha Zaara's voice cut through the tension, formal and commanding. "The councils are assembled. Shall we begin?" Alara squeezed Draven's hand once more before stepping forward, taking the lead. "We're here today to formalize an alliance," she began, her voice carrying through the room, "an alliance that many of you thought impossible." She scanned the room, meeting the eyes of both councils. Shadow Fen and Blood Moon working together instead of destroying each other. "I know there's skepticism, fear, anger at how quickly this is moving." She held the silence for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle. "But I also know this, we're all tired. Tired of the war. Tired of sacrificing resources, lives, to maintain conflicts that we inherited." "Pretty words," Councillor Malus interjected sharply. "But actions speak louder." Alara turned her gaze toward him, unwavering. "What guarantee do we have that Shadow Fen won't use this alliance to regain power and strike against us?" "The same guarantee you have," Alara shot back. "That Blood Moon won't use this alliance to finally absorb our pack." The room was silent for a heartbeat before Alara spoke again. "Trust," she said. "Trust built slowly through demonstrated commitment to the terms we've negotiated, and the mate bond." Another counselor spoke up, his voice skeptical. "How does that bond factor into alliance decisions? Will Alpha Alara's judgment be compromised by her connection to Alpha King?" "Draven?" Alara's voice was cold as she responded. "My judgment is my own. The mate bond doesn't override my responsibility to Shadow Fen. If anything, it ensures Draven and I are aligned in wanting both our packs to thrive. We now share an interest in success." "That's correct," Draven added, stepping forward, standing by her side. "The bond doesn't make us weaker, it makes us stronger." He paused, his amber eyes scanning the assembly, a quiet authority in his gaze. Two perspectives, two sets of skills, two packs worth of resources, all working toward the same goals. He let the words hang in the air before continuing. "I know many of you have doubts about me accepting a mate from a rival pack. I know you're unsure whether Alara can truly be trusted." His voice softened. "Those doubts are natural, but here's what I ask of you. Give us 6 months. Let us prove this alliance can work." Murmurs rippled through both councils. 6 months. It was a fair trial period, long enough to see real results, but not so long that irreversible damage could be done if things went wrong. "I'll agree to that," Alara said, locking eyes with Draven. They hadn't discussed it beforehand, but it was a smart move. 6 months to prove that Shadow Fen and Blood Moon could operate as allies, that their packs could benefit from cooperation, instead of suffering from endless conflict. Orin nodded slowly after a beat. The neutral council will monitor the alliance's progress, he said, his voice deep with authority. We'll provide an objective assessment at the 6-month mark. Does this satisfy both parties? There was a reluctant murmur of agreement from both sides. It wasn't enthusiastic, but it was acceptance. And for now, that would have to be enough. The meeting continued for another hour, covering logistics, trade agreements, and a dozen other practical details that came with merging two rival operations. By the end of the meeting, Alara's head throbbed and her patience had nearly run out. But they had done it. They'd actually managed to get both councils to agree to give the alliance a try. That went better than expected, Draven murmured as they stepped out of the council chamber. The sky was painted in shades of amber and gold as the sun set, casting the same warm glow as his eyes. Your standards for better than expected must be pretty low, Alara remarked, but despite her exhaustion, she was smiling. Though I'll admit, I thought Councillor Malus was going to challenge you to a fight at one point. He wanted to, Draven said, a glint of humor in his voice. I could smell it on him. His hand found hers again, this time without hiding it. They hadn't claimed each other yet, as they had agreed to wait until the alliance was more stable. But small touches like this were becoming second nature. But he's smart enough to know that challenging me over a mate, bond he disagrees with, won't win him any support. Give him time, Alara replied. He'll find another angle. Alara leaned against the stone railing of the balcony, looking out over Blood Moon's territory. It was breathtaking, lush forests, rolling hills, land that spoke of prosperity and strength. So different from Shadow Fen's marshlands. You're thinking too loud again, Draven said, his voice warm and amused as he stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. The gesture was becoming familiar, comforting in ways she hadn't expected. What's wrong? He asked, his tone soft. Nothing's wrong, Alara said. Just processing. 2 weeks ago we were enemies. Now we're partners. It's a lot to adjust to. Tell me about it. Draven's voice was light, but there was a flicker of truth in his eyes. I keep expecting you to argue with my decisions out of habit. I probably still will. Alara turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. Equal partners means I get to tell you when you're being an arrogant ass. Draven smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. I'm counting on it. Though maybe you could do it in private sometimes. My council's already questioning my judgment for taking a mate who challenges me publicly. Then your council needs to adjust their expectations, Alara said firmly, locking eyes with him. I'm not going to be a meek Luna who defers to your authority. That was never part of our deal. Good, Draven said, his voice low, his lips brushing her forehead in a soft kiss. I don't want meek. I want you exactly as you are, sharp, fierce, and impossible. Impossible! Alara raised an eyebrow. Impossibly perfect, Draven murmured, his smile soft now, free from any challenge or arrogance. For me, at least. Alara's heart fluttered with something complicated, a mix of emotions she couldn't fully name. The bond was still new, still fragile. The alliance could fail. The mate bond might prove more curse than blessing. Everything they had worked for could crumble. But for now, standing together on a balcony as the sun set over land that might someday be theirs, together, Alara allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, the universe knew what it was doing when it bound her to this impossible, infuriating, wonderful Alpha King. 6 months, she said quietly, her voice soft yet resolute. Think we can make it. 6 months is just the beginning, Draven said, his arms tightening around her. We're going to make this work, Alara. Both the Alliance and us. Because I'm not giving up on either. Neither am I. Alara kissed him then, fierce, claiming her promise sealed with a touch instead of words. 2 alphas, 1 impossible bond. A future neither of them could have imagined 2 weeks ago. It was insane, unprecedented, probably doomed in a dozen ways. But it was theirs, and they were going to fight like hell to make it work. For more alpha romance, political intrigue, and mates who defy the odds, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Comment below what you think will happen next for these two rival alphas, and let me know what kind of alpha romance you want to see next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.